Oh, I think,
Both.
I think probably just talking directly to me, it'd make it a little more natural. Okay, ready? I'm Dr. David Larson, and we are privileged today to have Dr. Paul Brand here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The date is March 15th, 1991, and we are, Dr. Brand is here in Milwaukee as the second Frackleton lecturer in hand surgery, and we thought that what we could do is perhaps document some of the things that Dr. Brand has been sharing with us in this two-day trip here. Dr. Frackleton is the first chairman of the Department of Plastic Surgery here at the Medical College of Wisconsin, and is unable to attend this lecture, although he is alive and well in Carolina, where he's retired. In talking with Dr. Brand, he has a history that parallels to a great extent the growth and the interest of plastic surgery. And I was wondering if perhaps you could share with us a little bit about you and your history and where you're born, went to medical school, and some of the work that you have done in India, and then we can sort of focus on some of the plastic surgery personalities that you've known.
Well, I was born in India, and my early years were wild. I mean, they were really primitive. My parents were missionaries, and they worked up in some mountains called the Mountains of Death, because they were notorious for malignant malaria, subtertial malaria. I myself had malaria several times every year in my first 10 years, and my parents also had it. My father died of it when I was about 15. And, so we were up in the mountains, and there was no road. We had no wheel, no transportation of that sort. There was no plumbing, there was no electricity, we had no radio, we had no... we were just the four of us, my father, mother, my sister, myself.
Is that right?
And we grew up, I just grew up with the Indian boys, learning jungle craft, and participating, I remember, in a leopard, in a hunt for a leopard, catching it in a net.
Is that
I
right?
didn't catch it myself, but
No,
part of the group.
part of the team.
And it was a wonderful life. I mean, one thing I'd like to testify, the simple life is just great. You know, I go and watch my grandchildren these days at Christmas time with all the pile. I don't ever remember having a Christmas present except things that we had made for each other, our own craftsmanship. And I think that the stimulus to ingenuity, when you have to make everything for yourself, and you can use just trees and rocks and water, it's challenging, even, or especially perhaps, to a small kid. And I believe that some of my interest over the years in inventive things and facing new challenges in plastic surgery,
Yes.
I'm sure it stems from the environment, the stimulating environment of having absolutely nothing. We ate well, but it was a simple log cabin which my father built, and we didn't see another white person for 6 months on end.
Is that right? Now, this would have been in the, during the 1918...
As soon as I
early
was born,
20s.
they declared the First World War.
It was 1914.
1914, and we heard kind of echoes of it from time to time in letters, but it was a kind of a background shadow in my parents' mind, but it didn't mean anything to us. And so it was a wonderful time. My parents they weren't physicians, but they did a lot of medical work because there was no doctor anywhere near. And my father had to open a lot of abscesses because we had a lot of filarial guinea worm there, which causes enormous abscesses in the leg. And I remember seeing my father stick a knife in, and perhaps 2 or 3 gallons of pus.
Oh my heavens.
And it kind of turned me off. it's
I can
interesting
imagine.
because later, when my father had died, my mother came back to England. I was in London. When I was 10, I went back to London to be educated
Yes.
at school, and my mother came home and said that my father had expressed a wish that I would become a doctor, probably qualified doctor, which he never had been.
Mm-hmm.
And they naturally hoped I'd be a missionary too, but this was his thought. And my mother said that she had discovered that one of my wealthy uncles, we had no money, but one of my uncles had offered to put me through medicine, pay all the expenses. And I, to her terrible disappointment, I just turned it down flat. I had images.
How old were you about this? This would
I
have
was
been
about 15,
teens?
15, 16. And I just had this image of pus and blood, and it just didn't appeal to me, and I felt it was wrong for me. And I liked practical things, I liked constructive things, and so I went into the building trade and apprenticed myself to a builder whom I knew, who put me through the whole trade. I became a carpenter.
Is that right?
Really, I enjoyed carpentry. I became a stonemason for a full year.
Now, was this after your formal, what would be comparable to high school education?
Yes,
Uh-huh.
yes. I never went to college at that time, never at all. And but I went to evening classes in civil engineering, and quite a little bit of engineering background. And I became a stonemason and a plumber, and I learned architectural drawing, these sort of things, and I just loved it for about 4 years. And then at about that time, the old memories of India began to come back, and I thought, well, I'd like to do this in India.
Now, this was, your mother had gone back to India? Or
My mother had
she
gone back
was-
to India. She worked in India until she retired at age 65.
Yes.
And then she decided not to come back to England, but to spend the rest of her life in the mountains of India.
Yes.
She found the mission wouldn't keep her on. They said they couldn't be responsible for a person over 65, a single woman over 65.
Yes.
So she found a range of mountains, another range of mountains, that had never had the gospel preached and never had no medical care. And she climbed up there and worked for 30 more years.
She died
Worked
at
until she was
95.
95.
Yes.
So, anyhow, that's the kind
Yes.
of background. But I wanted to go back to India, and so I applied to a mission society. And they sent me to a school specifically designed for this. As part of my training, in addition to Bible and other things, I
Yes.
had to learn how to take care of myself. And they sent me to be a dresser in hospitals, and we had a doctor who would come and lecture to us. And I began to get a totally new picture of medicine and realized what a wonderful thing it would be. I remember seeing a blood transfusion, which really blew my mind. You see a person who, by somebody else's blood, you could get new life coming in. It was very
Now,
exciting.
you and Philip Yancey have written about that in,
That's right.
in your, some of your
Yeah.
books.
And so I went into medicine and did the full course in London. And there I met my wife, the one who was to be my wife.
Now, you all met in medical school?
We met across the chemistry bench
I see.
in our first year.
In the test tubes.
And at the end of med, and that was the wartime. And really my first exposure to surgery was entirely in the war. In fact,
Now, this
many-
was World War II.
World War II. So many of our surgeons had gone to France, to the Army and Air Force and so on. And so we were rather short of surgeons, and we were in the middle of the bombing of London. And I lived the whole way through all the Blitz, all the flying bombs. And because we had such a lot of casualties pouring into our hospitals at night,
Yes.
most of the time we just patched them up, did essential surgery, and then shipped them out to the country.
Triage.
But we didn't have enough surgeons to handle it. So the senior medical students were pushed ahead, and they would do the big stuff. And I would be given the many, many patients in the flying bomb era were just full of splintered glass. You know, if you were standing up in a room when a flying bomb burst down the road, the whole window blew into you. And I used to spend hours just picking out pieces of glass, faces, chests, bellies, everywhere. And anyhow, we had a lot of experience, a lot of traumatic surgery at that time. And then I stayed on and did my FRCS, the equivalent of the surgical boards.
Yes.
And very shortly afterwards, had a sudden message from India informing me that a new medical college had been started as an international Christian enterprise, sponsored by about 50 different missions and denominations,
Yes.
foundations, and that they urgently needed an additional surgeon to meet the requirements of the university
Oh, just for them to be certified.
to be certified. They had already admitted 2 classes of students who were going through anatomy and physiology, which had been passed. And they were due to come into the clinical years, but they lacked the required number of teachers. And they said, this is urgent, emergency. And
It sounds more of an administrative emergency,
Well-
as well as obviously practical.
that's right. And so Margaret and I, my wife and I, she was just having our second baby. First one having been born in the middle of an air raid. We decided this was it, but it was a short-term contract. And so I went up by myself because she was having a baby.
Yes,
And I said that if things seem to be right for us, I'll send for you.
yes.
Otherwise, I'll come back at the end of the contract. And so I sent for her, and she came out, and that 1 year became 2, and the 2 years became 5, and the 5 years became 19 in the end.
Right.
And we had a wonderful time, and I enjoyed teaching. I began really on general surgery. I was doing everything practically, whatever came, with a little bit of a leaning towards orthopedics. And then, the critical time in my life came when I first really began to examine leprosy patients. Because in our area of India, 2% of the whole population had leprosy. But once they were diagnosed, they were kind of shut out of homes and jobs.
Yes.
And they became beggars. And these lines of beggars kind of got under my skin. I thought, well, these terrible deformities, why didn't they ever come to see me? Because I'm a reconstructive surgeon.
Surely.
They ought to, I'd like at least to see them. But people told me that if they came in, nobody would admit them. That people were so afraid of leprosy that all the other patients would run away if leprosy patients came in. So I went to a leprosy institution and began examining, and found to my amazement that there was no article in the literature, anywhere in the medical literature, describing any attempt to correct the deformities.
The hand deformities or just
Hand
any deformities?
Well, any deformities. The extent of surgery in those days was amputation. If the foot became too bad, it was chopped off. Period. And no, there was one other thing that some people had tried to do. They had tried to strip the sheath from nerves because there was a big nerve paralysis.
Yes.
And the nerves became very swollen. And some people thought that if they stripped the nerve of its sheath, it would help. And so people had done that. But other than that, zero. So it became my hobby. I recruited some young Indian boys, just high school finishers, and trained them in different aspects of evaluation. And I had a whole team of them, maybe 5, going out to villages, going out to leprosy institutions, and simply evaluating patterns of paralysis and keeping records of it.
I see.
And we had kind of punch cards. And we did, as I remember, 2,000 cases at that stage, and recognized a wonderful pattern, that there was a very precise, unlike polio, which we were also dealing with.
Yes.
Polio paralyzed anything. Leprosy never paralyzed the high median nerve. It always paralyzed high ulnar and low median. And I thought, well, why should we always do that? And so it took a lot of study, and finally it came down to the fact that the germ of leprosy is temperature sensitive. It doesn't like body temperature.
Now, that had been appreciated before you identified
No,
that?
no. I was the first one to write an article, a published article in the Medical Press, finding what I thought was only in theory, that temperature determined the activity of the mycobacterium leprae. And later it was proved, both at Carville and elsewhere, it was found that the mouse foot pad, for example,
Right.
that the growth, Charles Shepard in NIH, in CDC, found that leprosy would grow in the mouse foot pad, providing the mouse foot pads below a
At
certain
a certain,
temperature.
certain temperature.
And
That was one of the last bacteria to be cultured.
it's never been cultured yet. It is the last bacterium which has never been cultured. It's been grown in a mouse foot fat. It's been grown now in an armadillo. And the armadillo has a low body temperature. But not,
Is that,
not
did you
in
have,
vitro.
did you have armadillos at
We had
Cargill?
an armadillo farm.
That's
We grew a
That's what
farm of
that cartoon was
armadillos
just about.
just because we had recognized, or somebody else had recognized that they had a low temperature. So we picked up on that.
Let's go back again to your work with the lepers. You were in general surgery. You had a particular interest in hand surgery, and at the time that you went over there, your only book was Sterling Bennell's Surgery
The
of the
only book
Hand.
I had never had a fellowship or formal training in hand surgery as such. In University College Hospital, where I went to medical school,
Yes.
where I had my surgical training, they didn't have at that time a department of orthopedics or a department of plastic surgery. They reckoned that everybody who was trained as a surgeon should be a broad spectrum surgeon and then should develop his interests later. So, so that was my background, and I had therefore never really studied in detail the important points of plastic surgery.
So when you went over to India, you were teaching Indian students. Did you, and then in order to really work within the, on the lepers, did you have to go and establish a hospital in the
Well,
leper colony, or
we
how
had
did that
to-
work?
All our survey work, all the initial stages,
Yes,
were done in other hospitals, other institutions. Very often, not even an institution, just a kind of a collection of patients in a colony. They gathered it, made colonies for themselves.
yes,
And but once it came to a prospect of surgery, I began to feel that we ought to be able to correct this, because we could predict which muscles were going to be paralyzed. We ought to be able to transfer them. In my hospital, although it was a Christian medical college and devoted to the poor and the disabled and so forth,
right.
they just didn't dare admit the patients. And they also told me that it really wasn't worth trying, because leprosy patients' fingers fell off. And why reconstruct a hand when later on the fingers are going to just become rotten and disappear? So we had to face that situation and find out why these fingers disappeared. And we found, of course, that the only important factor was the loss of pain sensation, which meant that when patients had injured themselves, they didn't take care of their hands. I mean, they would have an infected finger and still use it for all their activity.
Really?
And of course, the pus would spread into the palm and the forearm, it would get terrible. And the bones would become osteomyelitic and sequestrated. And then the finger would shrink back to the residual skeleton. So that, anyhow, it's a long story, but basically we had to finally build a place we call the New Life Center, with mud walls or sun-dried bricks, and thatched roof, and bamboo rafters. And we built it. My old employer in England, the builder who taught me building,
Yes.
he contributed money to build that little place.
And then you used your skills that you had
And we
gained early.
we
in
did
life.
surgical operations in a little hut there. We made a shadowless lamp from beaten aluminum in a parabola with a 100-watt bulb. It was a little bit too hot, but other than that, it made good light. And we had a pressure cooker, a big pressure cooker for our instruments.
But it was like a hospital within the medical college that was
Right.
dedicated to
Sure.
the
That's
care
right,
of
yes.
the leper.
And we had a wonderful cooperation at the end, absolutely magnificent. And the medical students, we had originally been told we had to have 2 strands of barbed wire around the leprosy area so that the medical students wouldn't get contaminated.
Mhm.
People were really, I mean, it was genuine fear,
Sure it was.
but the medical students got so interested, and they crossed those barbed wire fences so often that they finally were trampled to the ground. And they came and built some of the houses. The Christian Medical Student Union came and volunteered and carried mud on their heads, little baskets, and built at least one of the major buildings.
Eventually then, the lepers were incorporated within the...
Now they're everywhere. I mean,
Yes.
every department has leprosy patients
Surely.
who happen to need orthopedics or plastic surgery or whatever. ophthalmology or whatever, they just come and go like anybody else. And of course, it's a much more curable disease now.
Sure it is.
So that is no longer a problem.
The stigma is gone.
Stigma is rapidly diminished, although it's still present in many, many other areas of India and also internationally. But it can be overcome.
It sounds like you worked in many areas in breaking down barriers that were imagined, and you were able to make a tremendous contribution to that, to the lepers. Now, other people have worked in the same area since you, have they?
Oh yes, it's everywhere now. We had at that time, when a bigger institution was built for research and training, which Dr. Cochrane sponsored and organized, and the leprosy mission was built, for a while, for the next 10 years maybe, we had an incredible array of international physicians of various sorts. The World Health Organization picked up on it. At one time we had 19 nations, representatives of 19 nations staying in our guest house.
Now, this was in Vellore.
This was in Vellore.
Before we get to some of the people that have come to visit you, I just want to digress and talk for a minute about your wife. And I know that she was actively involved with working with these people over there. Could you just speak to that?
She took up ophthalmology after she got to India. She was never trained in ophthalmology in England. But I was supported because I was on the staff. But at that time, the mission never supported a husband and wife separately. They just, and therefore, Margaret was there and simply offered herself, volunteered for any work that was necessary. And initially, they gave her pediatrics to work in, which she was happy about. And then they asked her to go into the eye clinic. And she said, well, no, that's one department I'm not going to go into because I've never been trained in it. But, you know, our training in London had been kind of upset a little bit by the war.
Yes, I can imagine.
And she had never really learned properly how to examine an eye or how to diagnose things. And they said to her, well, look, we need somebody, we need a doctor in the department. You'll learn. Start Monday. So this was
kind of a trial by fire, yeah.
And she learned, and later she was trained, very well trained, by an American professor. Victor Rambo was a very well-known name in mission circles, a great, great ophthalmologist from America. And he took her under his wing and trained her.
So she went and trained with him for then a period of time?
That's right, yes, in India. Yeah, and he was with us in India.
I see, okay.
Teaching in medical college. And then, of course, she became interested in leprosy. And she is the first person ever to do serious, sustained research and writing on the eye complications of leprosy. So we're Mr. and Mrs. Leper. Anyway, so we worked together in that. That was a bit.
Yes. These last couple of days, we have talked about some of the names and associations that you've had over the years with plastic surgery, and Sir Howard Gillies and Archibald McIndoe, and a variety of people that have come to visit you, both from a plastic and hand surgery as well as other areas in reconstructive surgery.
This was very significant indeed. And you see, I was out there with this book of Bunnell's,
right,
first edition, reading it through, and my first interest was hands. I wanted to try to get these claw hands functioning properly. And I was working away with those. And that led us to feet and the ulceration of the feet. And we did many, many, many things. But basically I felt very much alone. Then in those days, the first people to kind of come and offer some help were the plastic surgeons of America. And I think one should first say Ralph Bloxman, very well-known name in
yes.
society. He was working at that time up in the north of India, what is now part of Pakistan. And he had a friend called Willie White.
Willie White, right.
And Willie White went out to North India to visit his old friend Ralph Bloxman. And Ralph said to him, now look, if you're traveling around, why don't you drop in down south? Because there's a young guy called Paul Brand who's experimenting surgical reconstruction in leprosy.
Now this would have been in the early 50s?
Early 50s, yes.
51, 52.
Early 50s, I think. And so Willie came on his way home, stopped off in Madras, came to our place, And I shall never forget, I mean, he was so excited with what he saw, at what we were doing, and at what we weren't doing. I mean,
The potential.
he recognized that there were points of technique that we had never seen or understood. And he had brought instruments with him, little hand surgery instruments, and he always traveled with them. But he left everything with us. He felt that our work was exciting.
Yes.
And although he was only there for about 2 days, I don't think he went to bed. He just we talked all night and so forth. And that was very good. And then when he went back, and then I think perhaps he was partly responsible for my being invited to address the American Society of Plastic and Reconstructive Surgery.
Yes.
And they made me a kind of honorary member and developed a wonderful program whereby a whole succession of American plastic surgeons came out 3 months at a time and covered a period of 2 years, about 12 surgeons.
Is that right?
Dave Robinson being the first, Earl Peacock, Bob Chase, who brought Bevan with him
Yes.
down in Chapel Hill, and Frank Masters, and Milt Edgerton, and Peter Randall had a wonderful time with us. In fact, if you take a list of all these men, they, 10 years later, were all becoming presidents of the American Society of Plastic
That's
Surgery.
correct.
If you take all the presidents of that kind of penultimate era, they were all people who had been to the law, and they each disciplined. I mean, the discipline was terrific. And I think it was partly Willie who laid down the law. He said, you are not to regard this as a holiday or a trip.
Right.
You are going to work for 3 months. You're going to arrive a week before the previous person leaves, so that you can pick up on the cases they've left.
Yes.
You know, one person will raise a tube and the next person will lay it out. And he said, you can have a holiday afterwards if you like, or on the way there, but your time there is work. And then Milt Edgerton used to he brought his wife and his kids, and he put the kids to school in Bangalore, and he himself would work through the week in Vellore, and then he'd get on a bus. He never would give himself a privilege that Indian people couldn't have. And he took the regular old public bus from Vellore, 120 miles to Bangalore every weekend, and went back to stay with his family for the weekend, and back he was at work Monday morning.
Is that right?
I really appreciated these guys. They were tremendous. And so they brought us a lot of, and they also trained our residents.
Because they were working, they were actually operating on patients with
Oh.
the assistants and making rounds with the
With
residents
the
and that sort of
residents,
thing.
and at least 2 residents or 3 really owe their plastic surgery training to this succession of people.
Well, they could certainly do a lot worse, couldn't
That's
they?
right. They had a wonderful, wonderful.
What a tremendous.
So this
heritage.
was a marvelous cooperative enterprise. And then you see, because for me, my primary interest has been functional hands and feet.
Yes.
Which is, we soon found that you could repair a man's hands and get him to work, but no one would give him a job because he looked like a leprosy patient. They'd have the collapsed nose and paralyzed eyelids and scars on the face, and therefore people recognize them as leprosy patients. Eyebrows is another thing. In leprosy, you always lose eyebrows. In the Roman leprosy, you lose the eyebrows very early. You'll go back to the village with good hands but no eyebrows, and they say leper. So that we had to learn how to.
So then you really, obviously you had a scope of surgeons there who did a lot of hand surgery, but there were other areas
Oh, yes.
of plastic and reconstructive surgery that you
And
associated with.
notably the face. Actually the first person, I think, certainly the first person who taught me how to repair a leprosy nose was Harold Gillies. By that time he had retired, and one of his old pupils had been a surgeon called Antia in Bombay, and he came out to visit Antia when he retired, and then he heard about Vellore and our work there, and dear old Harold and his wife, Lady Gillies, they came out and stayed with us, and he was ostensibly in India to paint. You know, in his last years he became quite a painter.
Yes.
And he used to go up to the Himalayas and paint Kanchenjunga and things like this. But he stayed with us, and he taught us how to repair it. Up to that time, we'd been repairing, if a nose was really badly collapsed, we'd chop it off and take a forehead flap
Yes.
in the roundabout. I learned that from Jack Penn in Johannesburg, who started doing it on the leprosy patients. And so we were doing that, and when Harold Gillies came to us, he said, nonsense. The cause of the collapse in leprosy is not any defect in the skin. It is the scarring on the inside lining, which pulls the nose inwards, destroys the cartilage. And he showed us that if you go in through the mouth
Open the ear.
and open up the area, and then stuff gauze through the nasolabial area, you could make as big a nose as you like. And he was incredibly. And then we lined it
With a skin
with
graft.
split skin.
Yes.
And then put in bone grafts, second stage. And we had some beautiful noses. And so Harold Gillies taught us that.
So now, how long was Sir Harold Gillies with you?
Oh, he came more than once, but at a time he'd be about maybe a month or so. And he'd do other things while he was there. People
Sure
would
he
hear, they all knew the name.
Sure.
And so they'd come along and somebody would, some girl would want a bust produced or something. And he'd do an occasional thing, just teaching us all
Sure.
what to work.
Sure. Now, what about Sir Archibald Mackinder?
Mackinder, well, he was critical in my life, not so much in teaching, although he certainly taught me things. But when I went back to England on one of my leaves, quite early on, after about working on that, I was really looking out for people to teach me something. And so I made an appointment with Harold Gillies to come down to East Grinstead, the old hospital that had been built during the war
Yes.
by the Canadian government. And there was Archie, and he invited me to his home and asked me to ask him questions. So I said, well, look, let me just show you what we're doing now, and then I'd like you to tell me what we're doing wrong. And this was quite early on, before the American surgeons had come. And put us on the right track, because I've never been trained in these things. I've just been reading books. And so he said, yes, I'd be glad to do that. And so he fixed up a little projector, and I brought my slides out and so forth.
Yes.
And showed him these things, and I had intraoperative photographs as well as post-operative photographs. And so I showed him all these slides and said, well, now, sir, what do you suggest?
Right.
And he sat silent for a long time. He said, well, I have a suggestion. He said, I suggest that I put you up to the Council of the Royal College of Surgeons to give the next Hunterian lecture.
Oh, that's enough to knock your socks off, isn't it? Oh, wow.
Absolutely not. That's
Unbelievable.
And he did just that.
Is that right?
He said the British plastic surgeons have got to see this. He said it's an incredible opportunity, it's a challenge, and some wonderful results here. He said you've got to be on the teaching end, and so it happened. And I got that Hunterian lecture that year, 1952. I'd only been in India about 4 or 5 years, and it was on the reconstructive surgery of the hand and leprosy. And then 10 years later, the same College of Surgeons gave me another Hunterian lecture for the reconstruction of foot and leprosy.
Is that right?
So that was fun. And of course, I went and watched Archie operate and learned a lot of things. Again, because he was a great nose man. And also, he was a member of the original hand club in England, which was a very significant organization. It had 13 members, and they had sworn never to increase the membership higher than 1915, because they said they needed to have a small enough group so they could really discuss real problems. And Archie Mackinder and Guy Palbatai and a few other people who were pioneers in plastic surgery, in reconstructive surgery, hand surgery, both orthopedic and plastic. And I was invited as a guest to attend one of their meetings, and got to know other people through this. It was a very good experience. So I appreciate that very much.
Out of all of those surgeons that you have talked or that you have worked with, because you were able to operate with these people, not just
Yes.
hear them talk and philosophize, but actually to see their work and to see their long-term results and follow them,
Yes.
their results on a long-term basis. Who out of that group would you say had the most influence on you from a technical standpoint or from a surgical technique
That would be
standpoint?
very difficult to say.
Or maybe there's two or three.
Yes, I think there were several, and I think that, there's Willie, he was the first, and he was the inspired organizer of this whole sequence. And I have to give, I didn't work with him very much, but I think he set this thing in motion. People like Dave Robinson, Bob Chase, were wonderful in the way they developed their techniques and work, but there are a whole bunch of them, and I didn't think I could really pick any one of them out. They all had different contributions to make, and it all fitted in together so beautifully.
It's amazing how God has really used your talents and your communication with all these people to have such a worldwide impact.
Well, I've been very thankful, I tell you. People sometimes say to me, what you could have done if you hadn't decided to be a missionary. You could have, think of all the money you could have made, and the big house you could have, the big car you could have. They say, what is sacrifice? And I have a tendency to lose my temper all
Yes.
I have never had sacrifice. I've had the most wonderful, and having the most wonderful life. And this has been such an exciting thing, and I think that this is, mind you, I think that God works this way. I think that those people who commit themselves to do the right thing and to follow what they feel to be God's will for them, I think they have a wonderful time. You don't always have an easy time, but it's a quality of life that I think you don't get by a lot of money and a lot of
Right. Right.
So I really enjoyed it very much.
It's interesting in the presentations and some of the dissections and things that you've been doing these last 2 days with us here in Milwaukee, that I am sure that your fascination with tendon transfers and muscle strength and that sort of thing is really, and the writings and the things that you've done with this, have really origin back in those early days.
That's right.
In India,
That's
as well as some of your architectural exposure.
Although there's another thing
London.
another name I'd like to mention
Yes.
is Mary Switzer. Mary Switzer was never in medicine. She was the first commissioner of vocational rehabilitation for the U.S. government. The big what used to be called Health Education and Welfare Building in Washington, D.C.
Yes.
is now called the Mary Switzer Building. Now, when some of these surgeons, like Earl Peacock, came back from India, they went straight to Washington, to the government, and said, look, we've got to do something like this in this country. And Earl Peacock was a mover in that particular thing.
Mm-hmm.
And Mary Switzer cottoned onto it and became very interested in helping, particularly in a certain approach to reconstructive surgery, in which the thing that Earl had noticed so much was that we surgeons and relatively briefly trained young Indian boys were working intimately together, and that we took the advice of these boys who saw so many patients and who
Yes.
learned to evaluate hands, and that it was a team approach. And they kept wonderful records. They were, because they were given responsibilities beyond their qualifications, they were dead enthusiastic.
Right.
And so Mary Switzer funded the first rehabilitation house in Chapel Hill, and that has been imitated in many cases. And I think that was, in a sense, the beginning of the present very happy integration that's been developing all over the country between therapists, hand therapists, and surgeons. Now, this had been established when finally I came to the point of retirement. My kids were growing up, and they had to go to college, and you had to make a home for them. And we went back to England, but they invited me to come to Carville, the leprosy hospital here, to set up a rehabilitation program in Carville.
Here in the United States.
In the United States.
In Carville, Louisiana.
And at about that time, the International Society for Rehabilitation of the Disabled, was now called Rehabilitation International, was made responsible for giving out Lasker Awards. And they used to give, every 3 years, they would give 3 awards, as it were, 1 a year. By another amazing happenstance, Mary Switzer was given the Lasker Award for maybe 1960. And I was given the Lasker Award for maybe 1961, or perhaps the other way around.
Right.
But we had to be together in an anteroom. And of course, she recognized me as being the person who had started off the other thing.
Yes.
And we spent all that time, there were banquets going on and dinners, and we both had to make speeches. But we really got to know each other and really to appreciate each other. She was a wonderful, compassionate woman who was a fine administrator and knew how to win money from Congress, and really compassionate. And as soon as I came to Carville, she brought her minions all the way down from Washington, D.C. To set us up with a research base. She said, "We just got to do something here." And that really helped us to develop. Now all this I've been lecturing on here,
Yes.
biomechanics of the hand, really putting it down in numbers and having it documented with good computers and good equipment. All that was paid for by a program initiated by Mary Switzer.
Is that right?
So
Isn't
it's
that wonderful?
remarkable how things work out. So, dear Mary, she was
Now, is she
Christmas.
still,
She's not alive anymore.
she's not alive? So you came here to the United States and lived in Carville in 1966?
66.
66. And
One
as
thing I should say about plastic surgery
Yes.
is that I was invited as a guest speaker to the American Society of Plastic and Reconstructive Surgery over in Los Angeles.
Yes.
And that was another somewhat climactic thing because it helped to awaken interest in things like leprosy and overseas involvement. And that was the year in which they had invited 3 guest speakers: Archibald Mackinder, Harold Gillies, Sir Harold Gillies, and me.
Yes.
And we were all supposed to appear in Los Angeles. And on my way through England, I called on Sir Harold, and he said he wasn't feeling well, and please, if he didn't turn up, would I show them these 2 slides? And he handed me 2 slides, before and after, of a patient in Argentina, Buenos Aires, that he had operated on, a leprosy nose, the first leprosy nose, as far as I know, that anybody had ever operated on. And one of his old pictures. So I took his 2 slides, went over to Los Angeles. When I got to New York, I had a telegram to say that Archibald Mackinder had a heart attack and died.
You mean that Sir Harold?
No, Archie
Oh, is it
Mackinder.
Archibald? Okay.
And then I got to, on the further stop, when I got to Denver, Colorado, I heard that Archibald Mackinder had died, that Sir Harold Gillies had died. And the 2 of them died within days of each other. And both on their anticipation of speaking to the American Society on the West Coast. And so when I took off from Denver
Yeah.
to go to, I was the only remaining guest speaker. And as I think I mentioned to you the other day, the 707 plane that I was lifting off from Denver, kind of going over the Rockies, gave a sudden lurch and sort of must have hit an air pocket. And I saw those jagged peaks of mountains. I thought, well, that makes 3 of us. No, that was a great thing. And I think the society has always been a great help to me, a great stimulus.
Well, I know that has been recognized by plastic surgery for over the years, and I know that you've also had a special recognition award from the American Association of Plastic Surgery.
Yes, indeed. Yes.
And it is just wonderful of you to come and visit with us and be so gracious as to allow me to interview you today. I
It's fun.
really do appreciate it. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye.